Okay, so welcome everyone to our community meeting for March. Uh, this year we're already in March, you know how things go fast. We're gonna blink and we're gonna be in November. Okay, so our usual agenda introductions, though we give an opportunity to people who are new to the call and to introduce themselves to the community. We mentioned what we shipped, demos, current future work, and community news. So this is our team. We have a couple of team members. Eden, who has now his picture here, and Owen, and didn't have a picture from him, so I need one from him so I can put him here. So welcome to our team. So now it's time for you. If anyone in the call, that's the first time you're joining and you want to introduce yourself and explain what you're doing and with FGA would be great. Simon, you have plenty of time to do that, so we can hold yours. But I don't know if someone else wants to share what they've been doing with FGA and why they're here.
Carl should present himself.
Sure, I can do that. 1 second here, so I can get a face as well. Yeah, my name is Colin Berg. Simon is actually a colleague and a friend of mine, and he has been relentlessly trying to teach me coarse-grained authentication and fine-grained authentication, and it's not something I master even in the slightest. So I'm here to try and learn anything and everything. I work mainly with Azure and come from a traditional IT background.
Perfect. Thank you, Carl.
Cool. I'm Owen. I've just joined Auth0's fine-grained authorization indexer team. I'm coming over from Slack, and I've been doing a number of things over the last couple of decades. So I'm over here to help make the fine-grained authorization product go real fast, especially with larger data sets.
Thank you, Owen. I'm sure you will help us. So everyone, good news for everyone. Okay, cool. Anyone else wants to share? Hey, Simon, Kala, how you doing? Okay, perfect. Next, Tom, go ahead.
Yes, hi. I'm kind of a new first time joining this, and I'm a bit late, but quick intro. So I'm Director of Technology at AutoStore. We're a warehouse automation company. We have many products, and we use Salesforce for some of the permissions and authorization, but we are now looking at OpenFGA to have a more unified system to manage permissions across our applications. So
Awesome.
that's in short.
Perfect. Thank you, Tom. Okay, good. So a few things we shipped, not a lot, mostly bug fixes for SDKs. The most important thing is that the new version of FGA has the super new and fast ListObjects implementation enabled by default. And we are getting now some people just be amazed about how fast it works. So this is Noel. Thank you for sharing this. He's on the call. Some changes they did and tested. This is the load test that they run for in AgiCap. So ListObjects before the changes were pretty bad, right? So they kind of 50 RPS they can handle, and 3 seconds P50. Now P50 went to 2 milliseconds from 3 seconds, which is amazing, and they can handle like a 20 more RPS in their tests. So thank you, Josh, which was leading the work on the optimization for ListObjects, and thank you, Noel, for sharing this data. It's usually great too for customers getting their results right when they upgrade versions. And this was kind of for improvements we were doing in check in previous versions. This was from the Docker team that they also that line is when they version. This was we did a query optimizer to decide which is the best path to resolve check, and it seems that in the Docker implementation we always taking the wrong path, and after we implemented this query planner that kind of test different approaches and go with the fastest, we could go much faster and solve their checks very quick. So thank you the rest of the team, which is not here, but Justin he helped on this one. So thank you everyone. So if you haven't upgraded to layer 1 of OpenFGA, do it, and applications will go much faster. So no brainer. Perfect. And now I will let Simon explain us his adventures with trying to integrate with Entra and how he made it work. He had a few conversations over the last few months or weeks about how he was approaching this. So I'm pretty excited to see it.
So I might not see if someone raises their hand or anything like that. So please just shout out if there is anything. Like I love answering questions. So hello everyone. My name is Simon from Sweden, Gothenburg. I work with a customer named Vitrolife Group. They do IVF, so they help couples get babies. I'm not very good at IVF myself, but I am very interested in authorization and also, of course, authentication. I've been working with Vitrolife for about a year now, and as a consultant, should be mentioned. And one of the first things we wanted to solve when we started to build our platform strategy and building how should development teams what should development teams take responsibility for and not, we came to the conclusion that authorization is always really hard, and we don't want every team to solve how to handle authorization. We want them to solve what is the actual model. We want them to focus on what's important, the actual hard part. So we decided on testing out a couple of products. We decided on OpenFGA as our choice, and after that we've been implementing it, and I have been implementing it using C#, and I'm going to add a big caveat here. I am I'm not a developer from the beginning, so I'm actually from the infrastructure and networking side, but I do development when needed. But if you see something really weird, that's most likely me not being the most idiomatic C# or .NET developer. But I have been working with Microsoft Entra and Azure for forever, since they released both the cloud and the identity provider. And we've had to figure out what should Entra handle, what should OpenFGA handle. And we've taken lots of different decisions, and that's what I'm going to share today. These decisions might not be the best ones ever, but I think they are quite good at least, and they have so far been working for us. And I thought I share. And if you have feedback, questions, just shout out and ask. Everything I'll show comes from a real .NET 10 API. The specific API that I'm going to talk about, it manages things like landing zones, domains, platforms, and teams. So it's like a metadata API in our case. The goal is to give you patterns that you can perhaps reuse if you want to build this using .NET. But we will be covering things like type-safe authorizations, atomic tuple writes, and bidirectional Entra synchronization. Let's see if I can switch to the next one. In this case, when we looked at this, we said that we can't just use Entra because it's either you get everything or nothing. That didn't work for us. But we also felt like we couldn't just go ahead and do fine-grained, because it felt like we want to have the ability to give everything through Entra. And we are very used to working with APIs like Microsoft Graph, which supports this. So we wanted to find a middle way between how Microsoft Graph is, but also be able to do the same fine-grained authorization. In our case, we will be talking about like domains, teams, platforms, and landing zones. Those are just entities, and in OpenFGA that will be translated to types. But historically, as I said before, each team would most likely build their own authorization handling using different patterns, creating different bugs, and no shared tooling. So this is our way of trying to like streamline it. And Andres, of course, if you feel like I'm taking too much time, stop me and throw me out.
Right.
So in our case, we started with the question in Entra, how should we define the coarse-grained layer? And we looked at how does Microsoft handle this for their largest APIs. We didn't really like it because Microsoft, they are splitting up how users are being handled and how service accounts or service principals are being handled. And that felt wrong to us because we want to treat machine identities and future agentic identities the same way as we treat users. So we thought, how can we do that in a proper manner? Because in Entra, you have the ability to grant scopes and you can grant app roles. But service principals and especially like things like managed identities you're not able to actually assign them scopes. You can only assign that to users. So we try to figure out how can we create a unified way to handle this for both of them. And our way was to streamline everything on what is called app roles. So that will create a claim in the token called roles. And then we decided on how we should like create these coarse roles, and we split it up in it's just a text string, but we call it the API name, the resource, the capability or role, and the qualifier. So in our case, I work with a group technologies team, so we created group technologies API. We want to expose an entity called domain, so that's the resource. We have 3 different capabilities or roles. That's viewer, editor, and admin. What those means is up to the actual implementation, but we've said we have 3, these 3 are the endpoint gates. And then we have the last one that was perhaps the most controversial, that's called the qualifier, where we have the qualifier all and the qualifier self. And the qualifier all tells the application that it should most likely allow everything. In our case, we still force all traffic through OpenFGA, but this will add an additional contextual tuple to the check that grants this access if you come in with an all qualifier. And the self qualifier forces the fine-grained authorization. And we see that 95% of everything will be using the self qualifier, but we also want to be able to support that someone should be able to come in with a all qualifier. And the great thing here is that we can now assign these app roles the same way for users and service principals in Entra. And that made it possible to like streamline it for us. And if someone raises then, I don't think I see that, so please tell me. And as I said, we have 2 gates, and the first gate for us is, do you have the capability for that specific resource or not? And if you don't have that, you won't even be able to start the fine-grained evaluation. And if you have that and you have the self-qualifier, we will check, do you have the relations required? And if you don't, well, you will be denied or disallowed by OpenFGA and won't be able to access it. And as I said before, scopes in Entra is being used for a lot of things, but we've decided that as a part of our authorization model and how we work with it, we actually don't use it at all, and scopes are completely ignored, and they are only used for things like front ends to be able to access a backend. And then the actual authorization model, well, it's much, much bigger than this, but we had to like figure out how should we be able to grant not only access to specific resources in like a specific domain, but how can we grant access to all of them in a proper manner? And in our case, I will talk a bit more about it later, but we created a role assignment API on top of our normal API, where we try to abstract the relations from OpenFGA, where we can do checks like, does this user or does this principle exist in Entra before we add it? But we also try to like copy how Azure handles role assignments and create a more flexible model around that. As this is an OpenFGA call, I won't go into super deep how the actual authorization model, because I guess you all know more than me about this. So I will continue. But permissions flow down the hierarchy. So in our case, we have this system and domains are connected to it, platforms are also connected to it, but domains and platforms are connected, etc. So we are now able to say that if you have access to a domain, you also have access to the platforms delivered by that domain and the landing zones delivered by that platform. And if you are assigned a team that if a landing zone has an assigned team, that team can see the landing zone, etc. And then perhaps in this case, everything is in UUIDs, but in my case, I've been using like names here just to make it simpler, but everything we store in OpenFGA is just UUIDs everywhere. But that wouldn't be very helpful in a presentation. So in our case, we've decided to not only support principals, as in users or service principals, but also to support groups. And when in Entra, it's actually quite limited on how you can do this. So usually in Entra, you can only have like up to 200 or 250 groups inside of your token. So and most users have lots more. We could of course start filtering on the groups, but we didn't really want to do that. So in our case, we make it possible to actually grant groups access, and then we've created a middleware, which I will talk a bit more about later, that adds the Entra groups that exist in OpenFGA to the contextual tuples. So we make it possible, and we also extract the transitive groups from Entra, making sure that we're not limited to only direct memberships.
A question there,
Yeah.
maybe you cover later. So how are you handling the data that is in Entra? Are you sending that to FGA as contextual tuples, or are you synchronizing it somehow?
So we are adding, you can grant access to a group using a relation, but we don't add the actual memberships to OpenFGA. Memberships to groups are always contextual tuples in our case.
Okay, so if a user belongs to 200 groups, you get in the contextual tuple 200 tuples.
Yeah, right now.
Okay.
But we haven't reached any limits there yet. But
no, it's fine. Yeah, makes sense.
But an important note here is that we only add the groups that exist in OpenFGA. So we don't add non-existing groups to the contextual tuples.
Perfect. Do you know on this specific use case, on average or max, how many groups a user has?
So right now, in this API, it wouldn't be a problem, but in the future, we see that it could go up to a couple of hundred.
Okay.
We're not sure yet, to be honest.
Okay, because we have a limit today in OpenFGA by default is 100 records in a contextual tuple.
Yeah.
So if that might be an issue. if you get there, right? So let us know and we can have a conversation about it.
That's true, and we might start syncing those as well in the future. But it was, since an important note here from our side is that we are using something called privileged identity management, and we use it together with groups all the time. So users become members of groups and are removed from groups all the time. So being a member of a group is an ephemeral thing. They can be members of it for 5 minutes or an hour. And so it's quite hard to synchronize that. So that's why we decided to start this way. But we were aware that.
Do you get events from Entra? So if I configure scheme, right, when a user is added like for 5 minutes, do you get scheme events from Entra when that changes?
Not right now. Not right now.
Okay.
It might be possible, but since Entra has so many groups, it could be quite complex to just synchronize the correct groups. But it is something we've thought about, but as it will be like a future problem, it might not even be a problem for us because the requirement is that someone has added more than 100 groups to OpenFGA and the user is member of those 100 groups. So
yeah. But that's why we like to kind of explore a little more because we are kind of thinking of how we can build integrations with identity providers to synchronize data, right? And we are starting obviously with Auth0 and Okta, but Entra should be next, right? And we should understand. We understand how.
Yeah, and
it seems that Stephen knows about that too, so I can follow up with him too. Awesome. Thank you.
No problem at all. And continue asking questions. I won't go into model validation tests. I think you all know how they work. So let's get to what might be more interesting in this context. So OpenFGA tuples are like raw strings. So when we started to building these APIs, we wanted to ensure that if we have a specific relation, we can only have a specific type of object as an example, and we wanted to enforce that. So in our case, we created what we call the IFGA object ID, and it has constraints on the type where it makes it possible to define that we have a relationship between self and an enum. And that, in our case, makes it possible to say that when we create this ID, we can only use this specific relations with it. This could most likely go much further, but that was kind of enough for us because that made it possible to like make this type safe. And the types we then created were required to implement the type name, and the type name is the type name from OpenFGA. So in that case, it made it quite simple. I can't be sending the wrong relationship into domain ID or platform ID, etc. So quite simple, but made it a lot more type safe and have saved me so far a couple of times. And I don't have to sit here and write different raw strings all over the place because that's usually, I want the compiler to complain when I do something wrong.
Excellent. This is something that we also discussed, Simon, and we've seen a few initiatives. If you search in GitHub, there are a few initiatives of doing this in different languages, right? But we struggle a little to build it like a first class feature in OpenFGA is that we see a lot of strong opinions on how this should be done in every language, right? So someone prefers it to do it one way, the other. So it's hard to set on, okay, this is the way, and people will just keep doing their own, right? Because they like another. So anyway, that is something for us to keep and see if we can help.
I think it's really important that we get there, but like the way I found here was when I have an authorization model defined in OpenFGA, the types actually doesn't change that often, so it doesn't become a big problem for me to manually update it. Not thus far at least. But we tried both generating C# types from OpenFGA model, and we tried the other way around, creating the classes and generating the OpenFGA model. But both scenarios required us to have a really good understanding of the authorization model and how the I think you call it the ASL or something like that, how the DSL is implemented. And we figure out that each time we added something new, we had to do lots of changes in the generation. So it was just simpler to do like a small generic type and start there. And then in our case, we tried to figure out how should we represent relations, and we kept it super simple. So we use enums, and instead of trying to figure out ways to convert in C# you usually use like Pascal case, but since it is supported to use snake case here as well, we just use snake case. Lots of .NET developers don't like this, but it actually works, and it felt like that's the simplest way to get started with it. So not super advanced way of handling the relation types. And of course, then when we have these types, we can now create our tuples in a quite type-safe manner. So in our case, let's say I want to create the user set group ID member. I can do FGA tuple create, and I add a group ID. I add the domain relation viewer to the domain ID, and it's like it feels very simple, and it suited us quite well. I made it a lot more advanced in the beginning, and on each iteration, I just made it simpler and simpler and simpler. So right now, this FGA tuple is very simple, and it can usually implicitly cast to the OpenFGA types from the .NET library. So it's like we can easily use these typed FGA tuples with the OpenFGA client. And then, as I said before here, we decided that we don't want to have like the managers of the API. They shouldn't go into OpenFGA. They shouldn't actually know that it's OpenFGA. They should work with role assignments. And we figured out that, well, we can in a quite simple manner convert between what we call a role assignment and an OpenFGA relation. And that's what we did. So for each entity, we add this role assignment endpoint where we now can remove role assignments, just like we are used to in Azure. And it worked quite well. We haven't done it super advanced yet, but we have and the only thing we had to do was create these maps between the roles the users see and the internal relations. Let's see what else. In our case, I'm not a .NET developer, so that means I really don't like the normal like layered model that .NET promotes with a domain-driven design or whatever it's called, where you have like abstractions on abstractions on abstractions. So I try to figure out what's like as a Go developer, what's the best fit for me, and I found what they call the vertical slices model or pattern, and that was super nice because that promotes that you don't create abstractions, and it promotes that you actually repeat yourself and stuff like that, which I like as perhaps horribly it might sound for other people. So in our case, we create these features, and each feature has an FGA policy where we map the coarse-grained capability as a requirement on that endpoint. And then each endpoint also gets its authorized async. And authorized async, what it does is it actually creates the tuple and the contextual tuples, which is sent to OpenFGA, and we get an allow or not there. And authorized async is then used by an authorization middleware, which also appends the group memberships, the contextual tuples for them as well. Let's see here. HTTP request to authorization. We validate the JWT. Then we have what we call the group membership middleware. It takes the intersection between the Entra groups the user is member of and the existing FGA groups, and it creates contextual tuples and adds them to the HTTP context. Then we have the FGA access handler that checks that the coarse-grained roles exist in the token. And if they do, we call the authorized async, where we also merge the authorized async contextual tuples with the group tuples. And then OpenFGA evaluates and gives us an allowed or not. And high level, it looks something like this. So as you said, when someone is member of enough groups, we will start seeing problems. We haven't thought much about it yet because it's a future problem, but we will see how we will handle that later. I thought it would be 100 groups, but I wasn't actually sure. I hoped it would be a couple of more. I'm not going to dig much deeper into this. And then when it comes to the qualifier all, we were thinking of, like, first and foremost, we thought if you go into an endpoint where you have the all qualifier, we will just allow you through right away. So we won't even send the traffic to OpenFGA. But then we thought that it's actually quite nice to have all authorization decisions taken from the same place. So in the future, when we want to audit, we can always look at the same place and see how all our authorization decisions has been made. So our decision here was that when you come in with a qualifier all, we add a contextual tuple that grant you the access you need to that specific endpoint. In our case, we add that you are an editor for that object. It felt like a simple solution for our needs so far, at least. And oh yeah, here we just make sure that we register the different policies. They get names based on the classes they are built in and stuff like that. Won't go into much deeper details than that. And then here's like one of the first problems that we started seeing. That was when we create an entity in the database. And at the same time, we need to create a relationship in OpenFGA between that entity and something else. In our case, we create a landing zone, and that landing zone should have a parent to a platform, as an example. And our problem was that we had these atomic operations for the database. We had our transaction, but if we could get stuck in a situation where either that the database operation failed and we had something in OpenFGA, or the other way around. So our solution here was that we added .NET project called Wolverine, where we could implement a transactional outbox. So both the OpenFGA operation and the database write operation are in the same transaction, and if one fail, both of them fail. And then, of course, we have this outbox, and this outbox will try to reconcile the OpenFGA relationships we've added. This works really well, but it added a new problem for us, and that made the relationships were now eventual consistent. So from everything being everything worked directly from when we added it, we went to the situation where we could add an entity and it could take a millisecond or two until it actually existed in OpenFGA. And especially when writing tests, that this became a problem for us. But we went with a solution because we're used to eventual consistency because we work with Entra. So we saw it as, well, why not add to the problem by creating more eventual consistency ourselves? Then we were like thinking, we need to build something super complex to make sure that we keep Entra and OpenFGA in sync. And the problem for us here was that service principals in Entra, they can only be added directly to the app roles. So you can only assign app roles directly to a service principal, while a user can be added to a group that then has these app roles assigned. But the important thing here is the user needs to be a direct member. If it's a member of a group that's member of a group that has an assignment, it doesn't work. And we were thinking, like, how should we solve this? What should we do to actually get this working? And we came up with a simple idea that we don't need an additional database. We don't need a diff for anything here, because after we've implemented everything, the self-qualifier is actually owned by OpenFGA. And that means that anyone with a self-qualifier that doesn't exist in OpenFGA should be removed. And anyone who exists in OpenFGA that doesn't have the self-qualifier should have it. So we just use OpenFGA here as the source of truth, and both for the access group, for users, and for the app role assignments for the service principals. So on our side, we take all the groups that have been added to OpenFGA, and we get the transitive members of them, the users and the service principals, and then we combine them, the distinct users and service principals from the transitive memberships with the principals added, and we just sync them, add or remove them from the app role assignments. And that worked better than expected. And then we came to the next phase, and that was like, it takes an hour. We run this sync once an hour, and Entra will start rate limiting us if we do this too much, because we do a lot of operations with Entra. But since we already had this outbox where all OpenFGA operations, actually adds and removes, went through, we just added a small logic there to trigger differential sync instead. And this differential sync, first of all, it checked, is this user a user or a group? And is it the first time we see this user or group in OpenFGA? If it's the first time, count equals 1, then we do the differential sync. If it's not the first time, we don't do anything. And we started talking about how should we handle removals. And the problem here is like removals of groups, especially, like how should we handle that? Because a group could have transitive members that already exist in other places and stuff like that. But the fun thing here is that if you're removed from OpenFGA, the Entra part only gives you the coarse-grained access. So we don't have to remove anything, because coarse-grained will allow you in, but OpenFGA will deny you right away. So we thought, well, we don't have to do that. The important thing is adding people, because that gives them the access. Because without the coarse-grained access, they can't access the API at all. And then we went with an hourly full reconciliation of everything. So we take the principles in OpenFGA, we take the groups, we figure out who are all these users and service principals, and we add them to the group and the role assignments. And
how often do you find issues, because issues in synchronization, like things that should have worked but failed, and you're catching here? Do you know?
We haven't seen it so far, but I found my first. It was kind of no, the synchronization has worked quite well, but I had a problem with the group membership tuples in the beginning because I forgot to. Oh, hi. Me and Claude forgot to add it to all the endpoints. So all endpoints didn't add the contextual tuples, and that became a problem. But that wasn't a synchronization problem. That was more of a me problem, not looking strictly enough. So. The synchronization has been working quite well. In our case, we use Aspire locally. So that's a .NET project to run Docker containers and stuff like that. So we run OpenFGA locally in a container using Aspire. But we also created like a mocked Microsoft Graph API. So all these operations that we do, we can test them locally. And then we have like these end-to-end tests where we validate that it actually works in Entra and our mocked API works the same way. And that has been working quite well so far, at least. And the complete picture. So in our case, you get the token from Entra. We do the JWT validation, like do you have the correct audience, the correct issuer? Then we go into the group membership middleware where we actually extract all the groups you're a member of. We take the intersection of all the groups that exist in OpenFGA and add them to the context. Then we have this coarse-grained gate and then the fine-grained gate. And then we go into the actual handler. And if we create something using this handler, we will also use this outbox. And then we will have this synchronization process where we do an hourly and differential syncs.
So the outbox is mostly for handling OpenFGA and Entra issues, right? So we are using the outbox. So the outbox, if I see there correctly, what ends up writing is in OpenFGA and in the Graph API.
So the outbox is used for mainly to do atomic writes to the database and OpenFGA.
Okay, great. So there's I was looking there at the image, right?
Yeah.
So the database is SQL Server there, right?
We have a SQL Server. That's where the entities are stored. So when we create a domain, that domain is stored in SQL Server.
Perfect. And then you also write a tuple for that domain in OpenFGA.
Yes. So we usually write like a relationship for it. So it will be this landing zone has a parent platform, this platform has a parent domain. Those writes are done atomically using this outbox.
Perfect. So you write to the outbox, and then from there you write to OpenFGA, the database, and potentially Entra, depending on what you want to see.
Yeah. So those things are usually not written to Entra, except that the outbox is used to trigger the differential sync.
Okay.
Because since it knows all the writes we do to OpenFGA, we also trigger the differential sync from there. And in the underlying technology is used for the hourly and diff syncs as well. So I think, well, like a couple of takeaways. We've found that using both coarse-grained and fine-grained works quite well. And we can now see from Entra point of view who are the people who has access to specific resources in our environment. We've found that type safety pays off quite well. I found myself multiple times adding the wrong stuff and the compiler complaining at me. Contextual tuples work really well. We use them for bypass, we use them for group memberships. We haven't tried adding too many yet though. The outbox pattern was the solution for us to do these atomic writes to both OpenFGA and the SQL database. So we have different sources that we need to ensure that we do the same write to and they fail together. We find that using OpenFGA as the source of truth for Entra worked much better than expected. We thought that we would have to spend a lot more time doing this synchronization, but it was much simpler, much easier, thanks to us having these qualifiers and figuring out that the self-qualifier should always be controlled by FGA, so we don't have to manually manage it in any way. Of course, test your models and keep it simple. Nothing around this is simple, but we've tried to keep it as simple as possible at least. I don't think I succeeded in that though. And that's the last slide.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Simon. I don't know if
Thank
anyone
you.
has questions or comments. I found very valuable all the parts about synchronization. I would probably want to review that and take notes again.
Yeah, I'll send you the presentation. I can show you exactly how it's implemented.
Awesome. And there's a few things there that we are also thinking of doing for helping, and so that would be great to learn more. Okay, let me go back to my slides. I don't have much more, but
does anyone have any questions, opinions, feedback in any way? Please.
Simon, you have like this 1 hour differential syncer. Do you notice like users saying that, oh, this might have to wait an hour too long? Like they're expecting kind of real-time responses or updates for this type of, group user being added, removed, membership, and like an offboarding situation, you might not want an hour, you'd want it as immediate as possible type of thing.
So we haven't really seen that so far. Mostly because it's quite new for us. We will most likely get there, but the important thing here is that if you are removed from something that grants you the coarse-grained roles, you will also be removed from the fine-grained. So coarse-grained gate is always required. So if we wanted to do something really fast, that would be possible. We haven't done anything around that. Our priority has been adding users to the coarse-grained access group. And we have one scenario that isn't solved yet, and that is someone adds a group into OpenFGA that we then synchronize into the access group, granting them the coarse-grained roles. If a new user is added to that coarse-grained group and they have never accessed anything else before, then it will take up to an hour until they get the coarse-grained role. So that's a problem we still haven't solved, but we decided that we will take it when it becomes a bigger problem. Because so far we haven't seen any problems with it. But my best guess is we will see problems with it. And then adding users, we do that with a differential sync, so that happens right away. So that scenario, if you add a user or a new group, all the users of that group or that specific user will get access within a couple of seconds.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Thank you for the question. There's a lot of. Have someone written a question for me that I don't see now? Please ask it, and I can try to answer.
You mean the naming convention on the patterns he's following for .NET?
Can you say that again?
Narrator? No, I'm reading the question here.
Yeah.
Stephen asked about if there are report on that naming convention. So yeah, I wonder if he was asking, oh, he's here. I think
Yeah.
you're there. Yeah.
Yeah, Simon, I was just kind of curious if there was like a repo out there that I can kind of look at and digest that a little bit more in terms of what you guys are doing for that naming convention.
When you say naming convention, do you mean the app role naming convention?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. We haven't open sourced anything. Not that we don't want to, but more that the company doesn't have anything open source right now. So it's a bigger thing to do that. I've written some of my thoughts about this on LinkedIn, but the big thing for us was that we wanted. Have you used the Graph API yourself, Stephen?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So we took inspiration from the Graph API, and let's say you have app roles there that are like groups read. You have groups read write, and you have groups read write all sometimes. And one specific app role was like application dot read write dot owned by, and we wanted like to figure out how can we create these kinds of app roles that works for both users and managed identities and service principals. How can we create something that works for everything? But we also didn't want to only use app roles for the service principals like it's done in Graph. We wanted to use the same thing for everything. So we like iterated on this a couple of times, and we came to the conclusion that, well, we will be creating lots of teams will be creating lots of APIs. So we start by naming it after the API, and then we allow the team to decide what is a resource. We have something we call a domain API where we are really strict around how we canonize the data entities within the organization. So the domain APIs is really strict around how the resource is defined, how they are allowed to expose it and stuff like that. But other digital products may name the resource something broader that is allowed as well. And then we came to the capability or the role, viewer, editor, and admin. And we weren't sure like how far should we take this, but we thought that read and read write wasn't enough. We wanted something more. So we went with admin. Perhaps we should have used owner instead, but we went with admin. And admin does things like it allows you to add it allows you to add role assignments as an example, while editor can't do the role assignments. And then the qualifier came in, well, what if I want to grant access to everything, all the domains, all the platforms, or something like that? How do I define that from a coarse-grained perspective? Well, that's the all qualifier. And the self qualifier is to tell you that, well, this should always go through the fine-grained gate. That was kind of the idea behind it. And we've been working with it, and so far it's worked better than expected. I'm still waiting to like find a situation where it doesn't work, but we do create a lot of app roles. And a big challenge is also how do we make sure that the development team can create these app roles themselves? How can we make sure that they can do it from Terraform and things like that? But that's like a completely different presentation. But I will share this, what I had here, so you can see that as well. But feel free to reach out to me, Stephen, on LinkedIn or something like that, if you want to talk about it more.
Will do. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, good. A couple of few things that I wanted to share. So I did a slide here that I shouldn't have, but so we'll be going to in KubeCon Amsterdam in a couple of weeks. I'll be there presenting with someone from Envoy, with Ms. Berg from Envoy on integration between both products. Envoy just shipped something called Build on Envoy. That is a repo on our website. This is the website, but the Okta firewall doesn't let me go because it's a brand new domain and it's suspicious. But hopefully you can get to it. And it's a set of plugins that are easily connected to Envoy, and we are building one with Erica for the presentation, which should be nice. There's also a lot of things happening every week about OpenFGA in the community. So this is a book from Siddhant, who is a member of the community who wrote this book. There's a section on how to handle Zanzibar in general, but OpenFGA in particular for agents. Another article that talks about how to do intent-based access control with OpenFGA. You can Google for it. It's pretty cool. And we are also representing on an MCP event in New York week after in Amsterdam to talk about this problem too. So a lot of things going on there. And you can also, we also found this OpenFGA viewer.vercel app, which is pretty cool. I recommend you to look at it. And I will try to get the guy writing it and to present it in a community meeting soon. But it's deployed. There's a repo there. It has a lot of new options that we don't have in the playground. We probably can also collaborate with him to get some inspiration and put some things into the official visualizer that we have in our products. So it's great when you're starting to see these things, right? Because it's not only people using OpenFGA and taking benefit from it, but also building things on top of them that help us learn different ways to use a product and push it forward. So it's pretty great. That's it. Thank you very much. And see you the next month, April. And hopefully we already have a scheduled presentation from someone who's going to present how you're using this for a gateway and for MCP scenarios and dynamic authorization. So it's going to be pretty cool. And yeah, that's it. So thank you, Simon, again. And thank you, everyone, for staying longer. And see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.